Vote against it.
Grant Robertson.
Mr Chair, I want to carry on from where my colleague Mr Mallard has left off, perhaps with some alteration to the form of language that he used. Part 1 of this bill are the preliminary provisions, and it deals specifically in clause 3.1 with the purpose of the bill. Now, the purpose of the bill, Mr Chair, is, according to this, to provide economic benefits to New Zealanders by improving New Zealand's capability to host medium to large-scale international conferences and related exhibitions through the construction and operation of an international standard convention centre. Well, not a huge amount in that to disagree with. There can be some debate about convention centres and just how much they add to the economy, but the notion that an international standard convention centre would be built in Auckland is not one that members on this side of the House have a great deal of difficulty with. But that's not really the purpose of the Act, Mr Chair. And in fact, Clause 3 is quite misleading in beginning with that, because it then says, to this end, and then it tells us what the Act does. And what the Act does is create a situation where one company is favoured above all others in New Zealand. One company is singled out. This is the classic crony capitalism of the National Party. Picking off one company and saying, we'll do a special deal, and what's more, Mr Chair, when we do the special deal, we'll have an agreement with them that totally contravenes New Zealand's gambling legislation. And I want to make reference to that now, Mr Chair. In clause 4.1(d)(a), we see a definition of gambling law, and that being the Gambling Act 2003 and any regulation related to that Act. Mr Chair, in the regulatory impact statement, we learn from officials that they put up as an option the possibility of amending the Gambling Act in order to make the changes that this bill facilitates, and they decided they couldn't because it contravenes the Gambling Act, because the Gambling Act is designed to reduce gambling harm. And there is no way even the officials in the regulatory impact statement could argue that this bill reduces gambling harm, because it doesn't, because it increases gambling harm. And we've had reports from the officials that tell us that up to 5,000 to 8,000 additional problem gamblers as a result of this piece of legislation. So it couldn't even, the government couldn't even amend the Gambling Act to this. It had to create its own legislation for this dodgy deal that goes against the very principles of that legislation. So, Mr Chair, the purpose clause of this bill then goes into the agreement between the Crown and Sky City. And as I said, on this side of the House, the idea of building a convention centre in Auckland is something we could support. But when we look at the report of the Auditor-General into this, what we see is that quite clearly Sky City was treated differently from others who sought to be part of building that convention centre. So this agreement that is here in the purpose clause is an agreement that cuts across what is good process, and that is exactly what the Auditor-General said. If you're Ngāti Whātua or you're Infratil and you were interested in being part of the convention centre, this bill, this report makes shocking reading. Because what it shows, what's going to do, I wouldn't want to know what you're doing there, Mr Henare, but what I do know is that Ngāti Whātua weren't treated fairly when it came to the building of this convention centre. This convention centre could have been built by an iwi with a huge interest in the Auckland area, but no, John Key came along and he intervened, and that's what this report shows, Mr Chair, is John Key's intervention. He got hold of that paper and he wrote on the top of it, close off the Sky City angle first. And his officials from that moment on, Mr Chair, only worked with Sky City, only held meetings with Sky City. The other bidders did not get that opportunity, Mr Chair, and that is crony capitalism, and that is the style of this national government. Mr Chair, the agreement as it's outlined in clause 3.2, Roman numerals 1 and 2, tells us that the main purpose is the granting of changes to the regulatory regime applying to the Sky City Casino in Auckland. An innocuous phrase that is actually about adding a huge amount to the bottom line of Sky City, above and beyond anything that they might spend in the building of this convention centre, Mr Chair.
Grant Robertson.
Above and beyond anything they might spend in the building of this convention centre, because as we go down to the interpretation section, it talks about the 30th of June 2048, which will be the point at which this agreement will come to its end, allegedly, although Clause 4.1d actually allows the concessions to continue beyond the 30th of June 2048. Trevor Mallard will probably still be in Parliament partway through his parliamentary career at that point. But that is a very long distance into the future to undertake it. Yeah, midpoint, so there is some time to go. But that is a very long way in the future for these regulatory concessions to be granted. But what those regulatory concessions do, Mr Chair, is that they expand the number of gaming tables, the number of gaming machines, to the extent that we're talking about percentage increases for the whole of gaming tables in New Zealand of around 8% just by this deal. So this is a hugely significant regulatory concession that is noted here. And it's more than that. It goes beyond just a regulatory concession. It actually sets up an unlevel playing field in New Zealand around the gambling industry, and that is why, Mr Chair, the government could not even manage to amend the gambling law as it is stated in Clause 4 of the bill. So the purpose of this Act is not just to build an international standard convention centre. The purpose of this Act is to give Sky City concessions that nobody else has, that contravene New Zealand's gambling laws, that will increase gambling harm, and all for what, Mr Chair? All for what? If a member of the government gets up today and tells us, well, the economic benefits to New Zealanders, as they're outlined in Clause 3, include employment, let's not buy into that for a minute. Let's not buy into that for a minute, because from the beginning of this we've had wildly exaggerated claims from the Prime Minister of how many jobs will be created. 300, 500, 900. Well, guess what? It's 18. 18 jobs. That's what it's worth. 18 jobs is the great economic benefit of Part 3 of Clause 3 of this bill. That is appalling when it is set alongside the massive harm that will be done to families in New Zealand from this. The thousands of extra problem gamblers and their families. And Mr Chair, when you go into the prisons of New Zealand, you will find people there as a result of their problem gambling issues. When you go into mental health institutions in New Zealand, you will find people there as a result of their issues with gambling. And the irresponsibility of this government to trade away a law for 18 jobs and a massive windfall profit to Sky City is completely shameful, Mr Chair. And Part 1 of this bill is the bill that misleads New Zealanders by saying the purpose of this bill is to establish an international standard convention centre. That could be done without any of the regulatory concessions that are in this bill. That could be done without massively increasing the gambling harm in New Zealand. But no, the national government made a conscious choice to go after an agreement with Sky City over and above any of the other bidders who might have been able to put their case forward in this bill. And Mr Chair, that is the wrong way to go about economic development, because the name for that is crony capitalism. The name for that is a rort of the system, a rort of the process that started at the very top with the Prime Minister and his officials who made sure that Sky City got the inside running. We actually can't particularly blame Sky City for this. This is a private business who've gone after the best possible deal and outcome for them and their shareholders. The problem is, Mr Speaker, the other group at the negotiating table, the government, weren't looking out for their shareholders, for the taxpayers. They weren't looking out for the citizens of New Zealand. They were just there to do another shabby deal. So one side of the table, you've got the tough commercial negotiators. The other side of the table, you have a government that is failing to act in the interest of New Zealanders, that is failing to protect New Zealanders from gambling harm. This is not a piece of legislation that supports the values of New Zealanders. It is not a piece of legislation that upholds other gambling law. Part 1 of this bill is just plain wrong. It does not meet the purpose that is stated here, and it allows an agreement to be written into law that goes against the interests of New Zealanders.
Materia Toure.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I am very pleased to take the first of a number of calls on this legislation. I have a number of amendments to the